Hello everyone, it's Emma and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're finally getting into how I make sourdough. Some things to note right off the bat. I am by no means a professional. I'm by no means even really good at making sourdough. That's the point of me making this video, is to show you that you don't have to be good at it. It doesn't have to be pretty or cute or perfect. You can make sourdough at home. It's really cheap, it's really easy, and it's really, really low waste. And I'm gonna show you how I do it without really any technique. I don't have any equipment. I don't have any fancy bowls or cups or whisks. I use upcycled jars, I use my hands to mix, and I use my hands to stretch it instead of like a bench scraper. So first things first is feeding the starter. I guess first things first is creating a starter yourself. I have never successfully done this. I will leave some of my friends linked down below who are closer to pro sourdough bakers than I am, with better advice than I would have. But if you're looking to start sourdough and you don't know how to make a starter, you can check out some videos down below, or you can just go to my friend Maria, Living Planet Friendly. She sells her starter. That's where I got my starter. And daily, I feed it a 1 to 5 to 5 ratio, which is different than Maria would recommend, but that just also goes to show you that there's no one size fits all sourdough either. Do what works for you. So my preferred method is to feed it 1 tablespoon of starter, 5 tablespoons of flour, 5 tablespoons of warm water. And that has worked really well for me. You can do that every single day if you want to keep it on your counter, or you can keep it in your fridge, take it out once a week, feed it, bake with it, put it back in the fridge. So let's first go ahead and start by putting this one into the oven. I actually used to bake in this glass bowl right here because this is all that I had at my dad's house. When I was at my mom's, all I had was a casserole dish. Work with what you have. Make sure it's oven safe, of course, to the temperature that you're working with. Most sourdough recipes will say between 400 and 500 degrees. I do 450, sometimes 400. I'm gonna try 400 today. 450 is just a lot and it scares me. This is the only thing that I bought new. It's a silicone mat to lay in here so that I didn't have to keep using parchment paper. And then I just got this Dutch oven secondhand. It just came in this week. This is my first time trying baking with it, so I thought perfect video to see if this Dutch oven works. I bought Pampered Chef because it was $50 secondhand, as opposed to Le Creuset, which is $500 secondhand. No thank you. My proven containers I already have. I didn't buy any Bannetons. It works okay. I think I wish I would have a Banneton, but these work just fine. I oil the bowl so that it doesn't stick. Let's see how it comes out. Yeah, so as you can see, not great. I guess that would be the perk to having a Banneton. It's in there though, it fits. It's kind of ugly. Hey Siri, put a timer for 20 minutes. I think what I want to add first to my collection of sourdough equipment is a Banneton, just because it does help keep its shape better. As you can see, it really lost its shape when I use these bowls. From what I'm picturing, it's a basket that you line with some sort of tea towel like this, and you just cover it in flour. That way it doesn't stick to the fabric, it doesn't stick to anything, it's super easy to remove. So my loaves aren't pretty. I don't care because they're tasty, and why I'm making sourdough is to reduce waste, to eat something that's a little healthier, and save money, ultimately, because it cost me about $10 for a 10-pound bag of flour, and sourdough loaves in the store cost between $5 and $8 a piece. So the 10-pound bag of flour will make me probably at least 8 loaves, maybe more. So saving a lot of money. I'm just deciding to slowly upgrade, equipment here and there, just because I feel like that's what's super intimidating about sourdough, is all these experts will be like, you need this, you need this, you need this. You need to feed your sourdough starter at these very specific times, and they just make it so intimidating, and it doesn't have to be. My friend Maria from Living Planet Friendly, she sells her starter. I will leave her tag down below. She gave me some of her starter. I used a jar that I already had. I used bowls that I already had. I used a casserole dish that I already had. I bought no equipment because that was part of the intimidating factor for me. It was like, not only does sourdough feel difficult and time consuming, but also expensive because look at all this equipment I have to buy. Let's see if I can do it without. So let's move on to the next step, which is feeding my sourdough starter. In an upcycled coconut oil jar, I've also used old pickle jars, old jam jars, whatever jar I have lying around. This is yet another thing that the sourdough people are probably gonna come at me for. Let me just show you. Here's my discard jar that I keep in the fridge. This is an old pasta sauce jar. I used to measure very precisely. As you go along with any hobby, right? Like the more you start to crochet, the less you have to look at patterns. The more you bake sourdough, the less you have to look at recipes and be precise. And I have stopped my preciseness already. I'm only 4 months in. So I'll take this and I'll literally just dump it into my discard jar until there's enough. Not today. That's what I usually do. Until there's enough left in the jar that I'm just like, that looks like a good amount to feed. But yesterday I only left about 2 tablespoons left in here because I made dough yesterday, so I don't need to discard anything today. And then for feeding, another piece of equipment that sourdough folks are like, you have to have a scale. It might help you at first. Like if you were a very, very beginner, I think they're expensive, I think they're wasteful, and now I barely even use a tablespoon measurer. I like to feed mine a ratio of 1 to 5 to 5, meaning 1 part sourdough starter, 5 parts water, 5 parts flour. And then from there, I can kind of gauge the consistency. And you can too. Do you want a more runny starter? Do you want a thicker starter? That just depends on how much water and flour you add. For me, I think it's the most important to do the 1 to 5. 1 part starter, 5 parts flour, because that's what it's eating. And then the water is just kind of to make it the right consistency. So sometimes I'll add 4 tablespoons of water, sometimes 5, sometimes 5.5, depending on the consistency of the starter and the flour. Once again, everybody who's asking me for recipes, I don't measure. I'm a measure with your heart kind of person in the kitchen. Measure with my eyes rather. Does it look good? That's what I do with sourdough. And then once again, I just use what I already have. A little tablespoon measure is all I need. And then warm water. I just pop the water in the microwave for 20 seconds. It's my perfect temperature, and it uses much less energy and water than running that faucet for probably 2 whole minutes. Suppose some sourdough experts would also probably measure the temperature of their water and get like an oven thermometer. Once again, I can't be bothered to buy equipment. I usually start with about 4.5. That typically seems to be my sweet spot, and then if I need to add a little bit more water, I'll add it. If I add my finger to this water and it like there's a reaction, ow, that's way too hot, I'll add a splash of cold water just to dampen it. Honestly, this temperature is probably a little bit cold. Essentially, it likes warm water, not hot, not cold. That's typically how it goes for all fermented stuff. And honestly, this is why I'm a little bit more, I guess, lenient as a sourdough person than most, because I have experience with fermentation. I've done ginger ale and kombucha before, so I'm not terribly concerned about being as perfect as some people. And then as you might have seen my rubber band. I only use that on baking days. It's important to do this early on in the beginning so that you can see how healthy your starter is before you bake with it. But since my starter is thriving, she is healthy, I currently don't need to measure how much it grows every single day, so I just let it on the counter and I ignore it until 9 a.m. tomorrow. But I will use this on baking days, because on baking days you want to make sure that it rises at least half, if not more, I mean double, so that it goes from this much to this much or more. And that's why I use rubber band. Personally, my favorite method actually is a dry erase marker, because it comes off of glass very easily. You don't even need water, hence the dry erase. And that way I can also write like my first line, 9 a.m., second line, 12 p.m. So that way I can see like, okay, it's been 3 hours. There's potential for it to grow more, but maybe this is it. And then if I check again later and it's rising a little bit more, I'll write like, you know, another line for 1 p.m. And then once I see that that line has stagnated, that's what I'll bake. So instead of putting like 3 or 4 rubber bands on there, I just like to use a dry erase marker, but I don't have one here. Here are the loaves. The rectangle one actually turned out much better than I thought. It was the circle one that seems to be the problem. Look how pretty this one is. This is probably my best loaf I've made in a while. Now this one, truly ugly. And I think it was just because the circle that I had proved it in the shape of the Dutch oven were so different that it got wrinkly. It's not that terrible on the camera, but it looks so much uglier in person. So yesterday I fed it that normal ratio and I discarded some. You can also work with the discard. I made these naan bread to have with our curry, these breads. I've made crackers, I've made banana bread, brownies, cookies. There's so many things you can do with sourdough discard. It's still really beneficial to your health. It's a probiotic, so don't throw it away. Anyway, today we're not discarding, we're gonna bake with it. On baking days, I don't discard, and instead I feed it 10 tablespoons of flour and 10 tablespoons of water. I just double it, so that way I have plenty of starter to work with when we're going to bake later. And if you have any sourdough questions, let me know. I'll do my best to answer them, or I will, you know, send you to one of my friends who probably has the answer better than I do. And I can also make a follow-up video, maybe. You're seeing this late April, but I'm filming this in mid-March because we are about to get on the road at the end of March. So by the time you're seeing this, we'll have already been on the road, and I have not tried to bake sourdough in the RV. Our RV oven is trash. So I'm not sure how sourdough baking is gonna go while we're on the road, but once we get settled, we should have access to a community kitchen. Dan's working at a national park this summer. I'm volunteering at the national park in order to get us a free campsite, and hopefully a community kitchen where there will be an oven and I can bake sourdough this summer. I also found that depending on the humidity, depending on the weather, I don't necessarily need 10 tablespoons of water. Sometimes I do 8 or 9. Let's see, I think that was 5. So I always start with 8, and if I need more, I'll add more, because you don't want it to be too runny. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. You can work with it that way. I prefer it to be a little on the thicker side. Also, I feed it all-purpose flour, and then I use bread flour for the actual bread making, and I think that's pretty common throughout the sourdough community. For now, she's gonna sit on the counter with this rubber band where current line is, And then once it doubles, that's when we're ready to make dough. That's it. That's all it takes to feed. This normally takes about 5 hours to double in size for me. But today I'm gonna try a different method because one, I want to try it, and two, I can already feel I'm coming down with something and I don't want to work this afternoon. So we're gonna use Maria's method, which is, she calls it something, a really good name, something like low maintenance sourdough. Basically, you make the dough balls and then you don't do any stretch and folds. You just let it ferment overnight and then bake. And it turns out really, really good. So I'm gonna try her method today because I'm feeling lazy and I need to rest. Sourdough is meant to be easy and very forgiving, and it is. I think really the most difficult part of sourdough is figuring out the fermentation, because if you leave it on the counter too long, it will be overproofed, it will be doughy, it won't rise, and if you don't proof it enough, then it will do the same thing, it won't rise. So you have to figure out that perfect window of how long to set it on the counter to ferment. But ultimately, before I use the Dutch oven, I used a casserole dish. Anything with a lid. You could even just put it on a baking sheet with a piece of foil over top. It does need a lid because it's a really hot oven and it will burn on top. I don't use a scale, I don't use a Banneton, I just use plastic bowls lined with a flour-coated tea towel, and that works really well. I find that works much better than an oiled bowl. It's the same day. I've been filming and I change my outfit every time. It's been 1 hour. That's way overexposed. Look at that rise. It's been 1 hour. Great news for me because I'm not feeling too good. I'm done filming for the day, but I need to go lay down. But that means my sourdough will be ready probably in an hour. I'll throw the dough together, I'll do Maria's lazy method, and then I can go lay down for the rest of the day. So I'll see you back here in like an hour and we'll check on it again. Look at this rise. OMG, and look at those bubbles. She is alive and really washed out. Oh yeah, look at that. That means she is ready to go. So this ended up being about 3 hours, which is still less than I normally do. So I basically just dump all of this in here. Because whatever's left, and then I don't scrape the jar, because whatever's left is about a tablespoon. Actually, I might try to get a little bit. I basically just leave a tablespoon left and then I'll feed it tomorrow. I don't feed it again today. That's preference too. You could feed it again right now. By the time I go to feed it tomorrow, the rest will drip down. I didn't go to the store this week. So this is all the bread flour that I have. It will probably be pretty close, but I'll just top it off with all-purpose flour. Once again, sourdough, totally forgiving. You don't have bread flour, all-purpose is fine. Do your research. I'm not a professional. Step one though is water and salt. This is something else that I do that probably not a lot of people do. I use tap water. It's accessible to me. Plenty of people will filter it themselves. Buy filtered water in jugs, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. That's not what I want to do. Sometimes it can actually affect it if it's like highly chlorinated, if it's really, really hard water. And then I do 2.5 cups of water. But basically, if you've never fermented anything before, there are two important things. One, fermented stuff doesn't really like metal all that often. Many people use metal bread whisks for their sourdough, but like don't use a metal bowl. As well as it's very sensitive to temperature. So you don't want it to be too hot. Too cold is fine, but you definitely don't want it to be too hot. Really, I'm not making this video as a recipe. I'm making it as this proof that you can use what you have, and if you don't do it perfectly, it's still gonna turn out fine. And then next is I'm going to add salt, 2 tablespoons-ish. I don't actually know how much tablespoon is in my hand. I'm gonna measure. I just eyeball it. Count it like a shot. 3-second pour. Oh wow, it's more than I thought. So I've probably been doing about 1.5 tablespoons of salt. Not quite 2 tablespoons, which is about where I like it. 2 or more tablespoons is too salty, but 1 tablespoon is not enough. Really helps the flavor. And then from here, I go in with my hand and I mix it because I don't have a bread whisk. And then when you mix it, you basically just want it to be as little chunky as you can. This is so technical. Like this, pretty milky. Like you can't see the bottom of the bowl. And there are a few sourdough chunks in here. That's fine. It doesn't need to be perfectly dissolved. And now we have the star of the show, the bread flour. I do 6.5 cups. So 6.5 cups of bread flour, 2.5 cups of water, 2-ish tablespoons of salt, and some amount of starter. I would guess probably 1.5 cups of starter. I do a lot. Most people will not do that much, but I find that it really helps bring out the sour flavor. And that's part of sourdough too, right? Like, do you like it really sour or not? I do, so I add a lot of starter and I let it ferment longer than most people would because I really want that sour flavor. So use this recipe if you want to, but also feel free to change it. This was not my original recipe when I first started. I tried Maria's recipe. I've tried other recipes from other really well-known sourdough bakers. And then for my 1/2 cup, I just fill the cup halfway. Traditional sourdough bakers are probably rolling right now because they'll use a scale and they'll use exactly 1,000 grams. And I'm just like, nope, I use 6.5 cups maybe. Again, I go off of texture. I'm pretty experienced baker. I've baked breads for years, not sourdough, but I know what a bread dough should look like. And I know sourdough is not your average bread. Once again, I'm going in with my hands. But I eyeball it. If it's too dry, I add a splash of water. If it's too wet, I add a dash of flour. Yes, it's a science, but you don't have to be as precise as some people make it seem. And also, some people like their dough really dry, some people like it really wet. It depends on you and your goals. Like, what consistency do you want your bread to be? What do you want the crumb to look like? What do you want the flavor to be? So many different measurements and techniques are dependent on you, how easy you want it to be, how hard you want it to be, what you want it to taste like. I could probably stand to add a little bit of flour, but I think I'm gonna leave it a little bit on the wet side today because Maria normally does for her bread. I'm gonna go wash my hands, figure out her recipe, BRB. Okay, she didn't have it on Instagram, but I found it on her website. It's called How to Make Sourdough Bread. Transfer dough ball to a bowl with olive oil and cover overnight. Let dough rise anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. I love a long ferment because I want it to be strong. Day 2, tip the dough out of the bowl onto a flat floured surface. Okay, so you do some shaping like normal. Brew for 1 to 2 hours and then bake. Oh, girl, that's so easy. I also like this too because stretching and folding can get really messy. It leaves bread residue on the counter. It leaves my hands sticky every hour. Well, and of course, I probably make it a little bit messier than it needs to be because I don't have any tools. I'm gonna slosh it around a little bit, make sure it's nice and oiled on the bottom. Here we have it. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll see how it goes. I'm really excited to try this. As I said yesterday, I was coming down with something. I think it's some sort of head, cold, or flu. Anyway, I made the bread today. Because I'm not feeling well, I was glad that this was very easy. They're a little sad. I know Maria's recipe said you can ferment from 12 to 24 hours, but I just don't believe that. These look so overproofed. Look how flat. They feel done. Maybe the bottoms look kind of funny. So I think I'll give her method another go, but I'll do closer to the 12-hour ferment because I just truly think that these are overproof. But I am looking to have a little snack, so let's cut one open and see what it looks like. All right, grand reveal. That's not too bad. A little gummy. Flavor's fine. It'll get the job done. You can take it, pick and choose what you want. Again, check out my resources down below. Other people's resources that I will have linked. I am not a sourdough expert. This is not a guaranteed to work recipe. This is just what works for me. This is how I make sourdough practical, easy, free, cheap, low waste. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this and I hope that you're feeling inspired to do sourdough. It's really not that difficult. It can be intimidating, but it doesn't have to be. Just go for it because, you know, if it all fails, the worst thing that happens is you waste a little bit of flour and water. It's not the end of the day. And who knows, maybe you'll be really good at it and maybe you'll start to save money and waste as well. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time. I will see you in the next video. Until then, remember that your small actions make a big difference in the long run. Bye guys. Because on baking days, you want to make sure that why can't I say that? Because on baking days, you want to make sure that what can I say instead?